We only have one episode left of The Dropout. This week was the penultimate episode, episode 7, titled Heroes. And today we're going to be going over exactly what happened in the show versus what happened in real life. And I'm going to be showing you some clips of the real life things, like the meeting at the Wall Street Journal with David Boyce and John Carreyrou. And stick around to the end, because if you think the character of Elizabeth Holmes in The Dropout dancing is bad, cringe, and funny, then you're going to find the real Elizabeth Holmes dancing and Sunny even more hilarious. So stick around to see that clip towards the end. I'm going to go through this in a similar order to the episode, so let's get right into it. And I'm going to start out with talking about David Boyce and the other lawyer in the show who is named Linda, but I think this is supposed to be the character of Heather King, who was formerly a partner at Boyce, Schiller and Flexner, which is Boyce's firm, obviously.
Led by David Boyce, and one of the other lawyers is Heather King.
Heather has just joined us as our general counsel.
Who had been a Boyce Schiller partner, former Hillary Clinton aide.
And then she went over and was the head of legal at Theranos. So David Boyce, I think, gets off pretty lightly in this episode. And he was a lot more involved. Even if you read John Carreyrou's book, he talks about David Boyce allegedly was pretty instrumental in all of the private investigators and the following. And Erica describes this incident where when she was at her new job, she saw this guy that was like hanging around in the car park, and when she went out to her car, he handed her a letter, and the letter had her address on it, and it was signed by David Boyce. And Erica hadn't told anyone this address. She was staying with her friend, and not even her mum knew the address. So someone had to be following her to get it. And I'll also talk about a bit more of Boyce's involvement when I talk about the situation with George Schultz and Tyler Schultz and what really happened there, because it's definitely a bit different in real life as well. So when David Boyce went to the Wall Street Journal, he did take Heather King, and when I show the clip, you'll hear her on the audio as well.
To help educate you on what I at least believe are some, false premises upon which the questions are based. They're very serious questions, and there's some very serious allegations in those questions.
And really, Daniel Young was there as well. He was like the Theranos person that they brought to answer some of the questions. And it did go down pretty similar in what happens in the show.
Is there really new technology?
Well, but listen, is it really new technology? This is something no one's ever been able to do before, okay? Theranos is doing it. And unless it's magic, it's a new technology.
And I'll even play some clips so you can hear exactly what they're talking about.
Also covers the way in which you run a blood sample on the Siemens Advia?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you that it could or it could not.
It just feels like you want us to give you the formula for Coke in order to convince you that it doesn't contain arsenic.
Nobody's asked for the formula of Coke.
So when it comes to the situation at George Schultz's house when Tyler goes over, this is very similar to what happened in real life, but a little bit different, and they have removed Boyce a bit from it. So really what happened is when Tyler went over, there was actually 2 lawyers hiding in the house, and George Schultz, I'm gonna let George Schultz tell you exactly what one of the lawyers was like.
Do you recall a time when Tyler came to your home and there were some attorneys from the Boyce Schiller firm there?
I wouldn't call them attorneys. The man was some sort of an animal, wild animal.
It was actually worse than what's shown on the show, because they did do the restraining order and all that stuff, but what they also gave Tyler was a letter signed by David Boyce, and they also were suing him, and they gave him a notice to appear in court in 36 hours.
And they give me a notice to appear in court in about 36 hours, a temporary restraining order, and a letter signed by David Boyce.
So what they did with Tyler was particularly cruel because they would keep doing these lawsuits and then they would move them at the last minute. So Tyler's parents kept having to pay for lawyers because they kept saying, oh, in 36 hours, you need to appear in court. So they had to keep paying for these lawyers constantly, even though nothing was happening, but Theranos was still threatening them. And Tyler's parents ended up paying almost $500,000 in legal fees, and nothing ever came of it. And at one stage, they were nearly having to sell their house because they were so concerned with what was going on. And when you see Charlotte Schultz give Tyler the phone and say, call George Schultz's lawyer.
When you say that the man assaulted your grandson, could you be a little more specific?
Verbally, he just went after him. But that ended what it did. My wife was about to pick an iron out of the fireplace and clobber him.
That really happened too. He really went to fax him, and Charlotte actually gave him the number and was like, call the lawyer, because by this stage she was saying to Tyler, I don't think this is real. And she also was saying Henry Kissinger is questioning whether all this is real and whether the box, they kept calling it the box, really works. So there were people beginning to question Elizabeth and Theranos even before the article was actually published. So we do see them in this episode get the FDA clearance for a very rarely used syphilis test, and Tyler has said many times this syphilis test was not accurate at all. They were cherry picking data and it just was not something that he or anyone should be using.
100 people who had syphilis came and got tested on the Theranos devices. We would only tell 65 of them that they had syphilis, and we would tell the other 35, you're healthy, no need for medical intervention. People are testing themselves for syphilis using Theranos. There's going to be a lot more syphilis in this world.
And they acted as though this was, clearance for everything and clearance for their devices. But in reality, it was a tiny, tiny point that the test was so rarely used that it really was quite an insignificant thing. But Elizabeth was touting this as the FDA believe in us, and it's just a matter of time before everything else is sorted. And she had this huge party for it, and it just was a distraction to try and, obviously get people in the company on her side and still think, this is really, going the right way.
So what do you guys think about the FDA clearance?
Around the 4th of July of 2015, it was euphoria at the company. It was, great at the time.
It was a big celebration for a little victory.
When they're having the syphilis test, Sunny and Elizabeth are talking about, the fact that Normandy's a mess and all of that. And what they're saying in that conversation about Sunny hiring the dermatologist and stuff, all of that is true. Like when Adam Rosendorf left the lab, he was replaced with a dermatologist that basically, I think, went twice to the lab. He just was a name on a piece of paper. Basically, it was Sunny's dermatologist that he'd had for like 10 years. And a lot of the stuff they're talking about, like with Normandy being a mess, and even some of the other lines in this episode are taken from the text messages that we got to see when Elizabeth was on trial. So those are really huge documents. But if you ever just want to have a laugh sometime, go and read some of their text, because they literally sound like middle schoolers. And it, like in the episode at the end, she really does call him Tiger, and there's some real delusional stuff in those text messages, and they're always talking about, these really strange things. So they're bizarre, but they really sound like they were written by middle schoolers that have their first crush.
I love you, Tiger. I miss you already.
Miss you too.
Staying on the topic of texts and emails, at the beginning of the episode, we do see Mark Rossler leaving Theranos with the USB drive, and that's pretty similar to what happened in real life. He did actually just email them to himself, and really they did find out. He actually had given his notice in, but he went on holiday for the first 2 weeks of like his, notice period. And when he came back is when they confronted him with the emails. And he really did go and retain a lawyer. It cost him $10,000 to retain this lawyer. And when the lawyer heard it was David Boyce, they were just like, delete the emails and move on with your life, basically. And he did have a new job, and he was then giving John Carreyrou all the information. And when he started talking to Carreyrou, the emails were already gone. But a little bit down the road, talking to John Carreyrou, he basically said, I stand by everything I've said, but I can't do this anymore. It's, giving me anxiety and all of this stuff. So he did, provide a lot of information in the beginning and set John Carreyrou on the right path, but he did end up backing out. But he did end up being a witness at Elizabeth's trial, and he was on the stand for quite a long time. And the jury did come out and say they found him very credible. So I think he really did, between the article and then being on the stand at her trial, he did a lot to bring Elizabeth and Theranos down. So before we get into talking about the ending, I just also wanted to quickly throw in that everything with Rupert Murdoch, that was all true as well. He really did invest $125 million into Theranos, and it actually is his biggest investment ever outside of the media. And Elizabeth really did ask him multiple times to kill the story at the Wall Street Journal. She even went there one time, and obviously John Carreyrou didn't know she was a couple of floors above him, but she really asked him a lot to kill the story, and she tried many different ways. She had all this political sway. We see her at the beginning of the episode, she's green screened into the Bill Clinton clip.
So, don't worry about the future. We're in good hands. So.
And that was Bill Clinton, Jack Ma, and Elizabeth Holmes. Jack Ma is the founder of Alibaba.
You founded this company 12 years ago, right? Tell them how old you were.
I was 19.
If you want, I'll link the entire clip. It's quite long. It's like half an hour in the description box if you want to go and watch it. It's still on YouTube. And everything else in this episode, the Joe Biden clip, that is at Theranos. Joe Biden really went to Theranos, and they set up this pretend lab with just all of the Edisons, and they were like, oh yeah, this is the lab, and they told everyone else to stay at home, like the people who worked in the real labs, and they just made this fake one and showed it to Joe Biden. And when they're sitting next to each other, that's at Theranos, and he's saying how wonderful it is.
You're charging historically low prices, which is a small fraction of what is charged now, and while maintaining the highest standards.
And also the thing with Obama, she was really good friends with the Clintons' daughter, Chelsea, the Time 100, which coincidentally, Adam Newman was on that Time 100 list too. So he's another one. If you want to know more about him, I have lots of videos on them too, so I'll link it in the cards above. But that Time list was not great, and this was really her height.
At the time, you wondered whether Elizabeth's connections were protecting her. It kind of caused a bit of a crisis of faith, power of government, how corrupt or not they were for me. I thought that Theranos was going to get away with it.
I remember all of this happening. As I've said in some of the other videos, I used to work in a lab, and I worked in a lab when Theranos started coming out. I started hearing about it in 07, 08, and I remember my boss telling me, this is bullshit, there's no way that this is possible. And so I've always thought that. And there's a point in the HBO The Inventor where one of the guys says that one of the Theranos employees said, you know, you have to think maybe you're wrong.
You kind of start to believe that maybe you're the one who's crazy, right? Because everyone else thinks this woman's great, and everyone else wants to throw money at her, wants to be on board with this, and wants to be a part of it. I mean, at the time, she was this like iconic figure, this woman in tech who was like revolutionizing everything, is this like Steve Jobs imitation. Sometimes you have to think maybe you're wrong.
And I remember thinking like, this just, I can't believe this. Like, this just seems so wild. And it really, everywhere you looked, like she, you know, political circles, magazine covers, I feel like she was constantly on TV and being interviewed for this and that. And it's just now watching it, knowing everything, it's even crazier than before when I watched it with like a skeptical eye. But now knowing everything that's going down and just knowing that it's all lies, it's wild. So let's talk about the ending. So the article was published on the 15th of October 2015, and the title was very understated. It was Hot Startup Theranos Has Struggled with His Blood Testing, and that's a pretty generous title for what's in the article.
By now you've probably seen the article published about our company in the Wall Street Journal. The man who wrote it, John Carreyrou, is a spiteful man.
If you haven't read the article, I will link it in the description box down below. It really is a great article, and I remember it coming out and just being like, holy, this is insane. And when this obviously is happening in the show, really, Elizabeth was being inducted into the Harvard Fellows.
And when this becomes a scandal, because it will become a scandal, what do you think happens to all of the other women who want to start companies? Who do they go to? Who's going to trust them?
And Phyllis Gardner had actually tried to block it and said, you know, like, this is all rubbish, because usually you have to be, you know, doing something significant to be inducted into that. Phyllis Gardner, if people don't know, like, she is the real deal. She is one of the people who basically worked on inventing time release medication. Like, if you've ever taken any form of time release medication, that's the person who was instrumental to it. And I can't imagine what a slap in the face it is for something like that to happen, like Elizabeth to be on it, knowing that she's a fraud. But also kind of a weird coincidence that she was at something that Phyllis Gardner was at when the article came out that Phyllis had obviously provided information for. So when the article was published, all these people were like, what's happening? Like, especially all of the authors of all the magazine and newspaper pieces that had lauded her and said how brilliant she is, all of them were like, what is happening? And everybody was calling Theranos and trying to speak to her, and basically we're just told, oh, she's being inducted into the Harvard Board of Fellows, she'll be out for the whole day. And Roger Parloff, who actually wrote the Fortune cover piece, he was like, how can your company has just been accused of fraud and you're like playing along with that bullshit? Like, it's, you know, it's crazy. So when that happened, she really went on the offensive. She jumped on Mad Money with Jim Cramer.
But here on Mad Money, we know something. We know that there are two sides to every single story. Coming to us this afternoon from Boston, where she's attending a meeting of the Board of Fellows at Harvard Medical School to give her a chance to answer the charges raised in the article. Ms. Holmes, welcome back to Mad Money.
It's great to be here. Thank you. This is what happens when you work to change things. And first they think you're crazy, then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world. And I have to say, I personally was shocked to see that the Journal would publish something like this. Every single one of the sources that we spoke with, who the Journal had contacted, told us that the statements that were being attributed to them were false or misleading.
And basically she was like, it's all lies, you know, it's not true. People are out to get me. I'm trying to change the world. And
This is what happens when you work to change things. First they think you're crazy, and then they fight you, and then all of a sudden you change the world.
So she continued to do this. She continued to really lie. And before, obviously she was lying before, but it was very carefully crafted bullshit and lies. But once the article was published, she went off the deep end, and she just was like all she did was lie then. And she really stood her ground. And a lot of people think that the article went up and then that was it. That was the end. The company was done, and then all of a sudden she was charged with wire fraud, and all of the depositions and all that stuff happened, and lawsuits. But really, she hung on there for a while because she just came out straight bald-faced lying. And there was a couple of events, like the Wall Street Journal actually had an event that she went to, and she lied at that. There was a lab event that she lied at, and she still remained CEO for a little while. We got a little glimpse in this episode of what she tried to do.
Because I know everything that you know.
What?
You won all of those emails.
Well, I'm the CEO, and I don't always read all of my emails.
She tried to sacrifice Sonny, and she offered Sonny up. By this stage, the walls were really closing in because, as I said, all these people who had formerly vouched for her, they all started questioning her, and some people came out straight away and were like, I've always been suspicious of this. And then immediately there was surprise inspections. Pretty much straight away, the little nanotainer was taken off and they weren't allowed to use that anymore. And things just really, really started to go down. And even towards the end, she tried to step away as CEO and someone else came in. She ended up even getting a big amount of money for their patent portfolio and was trying to stay afloat there. But as we'll see next episode, this really is the beginning of the end. It's all downhill from here.
Can't touch this.
All around the mulberry bush, the monkey chased the weasel. The monkey thought it was all in good fun. Pop goes the weasel. A penny for a spool of thread, a tuppence for a needle. That's the way the money goes. Pop goes the weasel.
And I just really wonder where they're going to leave it, whether they'll leave it at the little bit in episode 1, the flash forward that we got of her and Sonny being recorded, or if we'll get a little bit of the ending with, what happened, her being found guilty, or whether they'll just do like text on screen whenever they're at that blue background filming. So I am interested to see where they end it. And I'm also really interested to hear if they mention one of the craziest things to me, because if they end it with her being found guilty, she rolled the dice. She went to trial and she had these amazing lawyers. And I know a lot of people don't question this because the father of her baby, like her partner, he is wealthy. He's like a hotelier, but they're not billionaires. And her defense is 8 figures, like no question. It's in the tens of millions, and there's no way that the fiance or whatever partner is paying for that. It's being paid, I'm nearly I couldn't be more sure of this, is being paid by some sort of insurance policy from Theranos. So they couldn't pay out their investors or nothing like that, but she got literally the best defense money could buy. And although she was found guilty, she was only found guilty of 4 charges, and none of those were patient related, which is the most insane thing in the world. But we haven't even heard what her actual sentencing is going to be because they're waiting for Sonny trial to end. So I will talk about all of that next week, all the juicy details. So make sure you come back next week for the final episode. As I said earlier, I am also covering WeCrashed, WeWork, Adam and Rebecca Newman. So if you're looking for something to watch, check those out. I do have a main channel where I talk about other TV shows as well. So that is linked down below, along with all of my social media, Patreon, merch store, podcast, everything you could possibly need is down below. And I hope to see you back here next week. Make sure that you're subscribed with notifications turned on. And if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. It really, really helps out the channel. And as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.